Good morning, people, and welcome to a slightly later start than normal on on session 3VA. This will be Dean explaining how to upgrade to the new WAPL, just to remind you, any questions in the chat, please. If it's appropriate, I will break in to ask Dean the question, else we'll deal with them all at the end. At the end, we'll have a proper question and answer session, assuming we've still got time. and don't forget to leave feedback or charity donation. And at this point, I hand you straight over to Dean to get your frogs in order.
Okay, right. Good morning. Sorry for the delay. Having a little few problems with Zoom, it wouldn't give me a share option, but I think we're there now. So I'm going to talk about upgrading to new WAPL. The title's slightly changed, but from the agenda, but I'll make it clear what new WAPL is a little bit later. But first off, I think I'm going to talk about what WAPL is. If you don't know, it's a utility programming language that allows you to interact with IBM Z Workload Scheduler. And it's basically a one-stop shop. You can do anything. You can extract, you can update, you can do basic scripting, and it'll let you replace a lot of the other older tools like the batch command interface tool, OPC control language, and the event stuff like opstat and opinfo. And there's a whole range of different types of commands that it'll let you do. It'll let you do the basic PIF stuff, so you can get at anything in the database or the plans to find them, read them, delete them, modify them, add them. There's also another syntax called batch loader, which lets you create objects from simple text files. And it'll let you create them or update them. We've got a range of operations to update things in the current plan, to modify your current workload, and a lot of function-based stuff. So we can add stuff to the plan, do repeating jobs, play with dates, things like that. The event jobs like opstat, srstat, they're all here as well. They're exactly the same as they are outside of WAPL. And we have a few commands that you can put at the beginning of any occurrence in the current plan that'll make it alter the way it runs. And then finally, the newer stuff that arrived, we've got the ability to send emails from WAPL, though you do have to have the email working from your mainframe in the first place, but WAPL can exploit it if you've got that going. And it's a bit of a programming language as well, so it can do simple decisions and loops. You can run it from batch jobs, you can run it from started task workstations, which I won't cover today. You can use TSO recs, load modules, you can call it from the REST API, you can call it from automation tools. Hopefully you can call it from wherever you want to call it from. But now a brief history of frogs, which the frogs will get explained along the way as well. So back in 1997, I was working for the post office, and I started writing things, bit of a user macro, developed from a member in the sample library called EQQ PIFOP, that a guy asked, just spelt Doug Space wrong, Doug Space name wrong, but there you go. Basically, simple sort of BC. I created a BCIT command line syntax program, and I think that got known as Opium at the time, which was the OPC program interface user macro, something like that. We rewrote that a little bit to add batch loader, and then it became known as Spire, which some people actually have used outside of the post office. Then Spire got renamed to EasyPIF, and we turned it over to IBM. So IBM got the rights to release it as sample code. The intention was that it was supposed to be for IBM to maintain and upgrade, but there was some legal issues. So in 2005, EasyPIF stopped being shared because IBM couldn't maintain it. But despite being unavailable for 15 years, there are still some customers out there using EasyPIF today, and it still works incredibly. 2008, I made a presentation called Juggling Frogs at ASAP in San Antonio, the big TWS conference in America. And it basically paralleled using the PIF to being like juggling frogs, which was difficult to learn, but you could do it eventually. And in that presentation, I showed how to convert EQQ PIF-op into a rudimentary reusable utility. And the following year, we released that utility as SOE. This is completely new PIF engine, written from the bottom up. And this one was based on a different syntax because we couldn't use anything of the old EasyPIF. And we're able to do command line and batch loader together. And a new trick for batch loader was you could update objects. So it was, it was quite nice. It was known as the Free Rex Operational Goodie Bag, or Frog. And that's where all the frogs came from. Then finally, in 2015, after being downloaded by probably around 100 different customers, SOE became WAPL, the Workload Automation Programming Language. And it got the new name primarily because it gained if, then, else, and do loops. So it actually became a programming language. But also we were releasing it as part of IBM Workload Scheduler for ZOS 9.3. So it was kind of relaunched as it came into the product formally. 2017, this is the new WAPL that I mentioned. It got kind of go faster stripes. We implemented an APAR to allow import and export via the dynamic workload console. And that introduced the ability to run WAPL inside the server task. So this was a new lightweight startup. It had no IO involved when it started up. It read everything from internal tables, and it basically also gave us the ability to run WAPL over the REST API. So if you didn't know that was out there, go and have a look at the REST API samples on the DWC, and you'll find you can use WAPL from there. So the question is, like I said, EasyPIF actually still works. If it doesn't work, why should I upgrade? Well, EasyPIF only knows about TWS up to 8.2 onward, up to 8.2. So if you want to exploit any modern TWS features, you can't use EasyPIF anymore. SOE knows TWS from 8.1 to 9.2. So that still supports a fair few users. However, at ZOS 2.2, there was a new way of working out addresses in the task input output table, and that caused SOE some serious problems. But that was actually discovered when SOE had become WAPL, and it was fixed in WAPL, but it wasn't fixed in SOE simply because we had to release a new load module as part of getting around the issue, and we couldn't do that for free because it was a license module. So really, you need to be on WAPL if you're wanting to work with ZOS 2.2 with initiators above the line, and generally you need it to be able to keep up to date with the new versions. So basically what happened in the latest WAPL release is, like I said, there's no IO at the start. So EQQ lang and EQQ ref, which were two reference tables that WAPL read when it started, they were internalized. So they're not read from disk anymore. The program's got them internally. EQQ ops and EQQ file were made optional. So if you didn't need to use either of those, options was where you could set your own default options, and EQQ file would load predefined file definitions. So if you don't need either of those, it won't read them if they're not there in the JCL. And finally, load def command was introduced to replace EQQ file. It does exactly the same thing, but it doesn't read a member, it reads a table internally. And we also created a new procedure so you wouldn't be automatically migrated to the new version, because there were JCL changes that you would have to make if you'd used symbolic parameters that were going to go away as part of the new slicker version. So we made sure we didn't break your JCL for you. You carry on using the old version of WAPL and migrate to the new version when you're ready. So I'm going to describe in the next few slides, hopefully I have enough time, what you need to do to convert from any of the start points we've just discussed to get you to the latest version of WAPL, or in most cases, the latest version of WAPL. So some elements are the same for all variants, so we'll list those first. So some general upgrade tasks. So first off, EasyPiff and SOE, early WAPL, they all had the ability to load a member that defined the output fields. This could be segments, all fields in all segments, all fields in segments of just the database or the plan, segments for an individual object type, any sort of combination. But basically, it gave you a predefined output schema. So if you were doing something with an application in the database, you would use a file that had all the application fields in it. So everything from adcom, adop, all the different record types. So now, instead of having to find the file with all the members in, the load def command does a similar thing, but it's a command in your sysyn, and it does it without any IO. So if you wanted to output absolutely anything from your WAPL, then you just put load def asterisk. If you were just interested in things for your application database, then load def AD asterisk will do the job. Equally, fields for a set of records, individual, you can do more than one load def. So asterisk, so that would allow you to load applications and calendars. If you want to be more specific, if you want to load particular fields from particular record types, then you would use output statements just the same as you would have done in EasyPiff or early old WAPL. Also, the load def command has some nice little overrides. So you can do load def AD asterisk, turn off the data output. The data miner says, I don't want any ILSN data output, but send my batch loader output to DD name mybl. And that will override all the default definitions. Whereas, for example, load def AD asterisk by default would have sent data to out data and loader to out BL. So this allows you to modify the predefined stuff as you're loading it. So that's an extra feature. The other thing, we made the options optional. So if you have default options, I would recommend, unless you really want to run options against every single WAPL job you ever run, you can put an EQCOOPS DD statement in the job instead of having it in the proc. You could still put it in the proc if you want, but you can create your own options and put it in the job. Could save you a lot of performance that way as well. If I have seen some customers that have very large default option members that basically prepare whole sets of variables that 90% of their jobs never use. So be more targeted and away you go. So upgrading from EasyPiff. This is the oldest variant of WAPL out there, or at least the oldest that's still out there somewhere. EasyPiff looked like this. You'd have an EasyPiff job, you'd run EQQ Spire, you'd have OPC CNTL equals the name of your controller, TBL spec equals OPC TBase. That's the pointing to a member with predefined output statements in. The ILSN data would go to ISPFL, ISPF loader, and the batch loader data would go to batch L. And the commands would look like this. So you've got action equals modify, resource equals, and that's the name of a segment or record, and then individual arguments for the whatever command it is you're running, with a semicolon at the end of every line. That, with the exception of the very last line not having to be a period or full stop, is pretty much the same syntax you see for BCIT. WAPL, on the other hand, or SOE is the same. You can see that they are fairly similar in that we run a proc, we pass the name of the controller, or in this case we use subsys, and now, because this is new WAPL, we're not passing the name of a member to load the things from. Instead, here we have load def asterisk. So we're doing a load definition to load all the records definitions from the internal tables that it has. Equally, the default outputs are out data for Ilston and out BL for batch loader. And the commands, you can see how easily the commands translate. The action equals modify becomes modify. The resource equals CPOC becomes CPOC. And then the keywords, instead of it being keyword equals, it's keyword and value in parentheses. So once you learn that basic change of format, in that the action and resource are the first two words in the WAPL command and the rest have a slightly different syntax, it's not a big job converting EasyPerf code to WAPL code. The other difference is you'll see this action equals execute resource equals MCP block. That has a WAPL equivalent of execute MCP block, but you don't actually need it in WAPL, because WAPL will automatically issue one of those at the end of the job if you've already issued any current plan update stuff. So it saves you having to forgetting it. And I guess the other thing is no semicolons. So that's your basic EasyPerf. It's not a big job. It's not terribly difficult to do. But then there are also you can run EasyPerf and point it at a predefined command macro module. I think they were called command macros at the time. I can't remember. And there are a fair few of them in there. But most of them now have an equivalent built into the language. So OPC AutoQ was a really nice thing that would allow you to have something in the plan that would automatically become successors to other things that are in the plan. So, for example, you could have something in your scheduled batch that would wait for stuff that maybe came in by ETT, and it gets around all sorts of issues with input arrival time and can do wonderful things. And that's the queue behind command in WAPL. So this is an actual individual command. You can wait for stuff using the queue behind command. OPC chop is change operations in the plan. That translates to the WAPL alter command. OPC complete, that completes an occurrence. Well, you can modify an occurrence and set the status to complete in the basic WAPL PIF language. There's a long-term plan check. This is a really useful utility that checks your current plan to see, well, it checks your long-term plan to see if your next extension of the current plan may have escapees. And what we mean by that is a job that has no predecessors, nothing to hold it. So when you extend the plan, it runs straight away, which usually is not what you intend. Usually you'll have a time dependency or a manual operation or some other dependency. And what this job does is it tells you when you've got one of those, so you don't extend the plan and suddenly find you've ran a DB2 reorg in the middle of your online day because the application that was supposed to wait for wasn't there that day. And in here, we've also got a WAPL exec utility called EQQWXNOE, no escape. That'll do the same thing. OPC preadd inserts a predecessor. Again, you can do that with WAPL PIF commands with modify current plan occurrence and operation, and you can either modify or insert predecessors. So again, basic language supports this. OPC stat becomes list stat in WAPL. OPC sub becomes the WAPL command add, and OPC suite, which allows you to add a whole group of applications together, also becomes the WAPL command add. So most of the stuff is there in some way, shape, or form to be able to translate to existing WAPL stuff. So upgrading from SOE. Now, SOE and WAPL are essentially exactly the same thing on paper. SOE finished its life at 3.3. WAPL is essentially SOE 3.4. So it should be easy. But unfortunately, we had what's called the blue wash. Now, this means that anything that we deliver must be an existing product library. So I couldn't create a new set of libraries to put the WAPL bits and pieces in if there was something equivalent already there. And also, all members must be delivered with the prefix of EQQ. And we didn't discover this until fairly late in the day. And also, we deprecated some Soe Execs because the language now had native equivalent, though we did deliver them. They are still there. We just didn't document them. Now, despite this, it is possible to get most of your current SOE jobs running under old style WAPL with minimal changes at job level. And that's because SOE already used a prop called EQQ YX JCL. And that is the one that was provided with WAPL version 1. And it uses the same symbolic parameters, same DD names, only dataset and member names are different. So how do some of those things translate? Well, if you've ever had SOE, there are quite a lot of libraries with SOE. There was a couple of setup libraries. Well, there's no WAPL equivalent for those because the setup is done by SMPE. Equally, there was, as well as the skeleton and panel, there was a general setup library. Again, not needed. The Palm library, that was where all of the predefined output members and things were stored. That became SEQQ WAPL. That's the only new library that WAPL introduced into the IZWS product. The Rex stuff, this went into the SEQQ MISC library, which is where all OCL and everything lives. The SOE sample became SEQQ SAMP. We used to deliver the alternate Rex library. Well, now that's included in the operating system, so we don't need to deliver that anymore. There were the Soe Exec library was where all the sort of macro modules lived. They now appear in the SEQQ MISC along with the rest of the language. The sample JCL that we delivered now goes into wherever you do your EQQ job stuff. And user POM and user Rex, well, you create those yourselves anyway, and you just put those in as overrides into the concatenations as you feel fit. So we didn't replace those because they're yours. So then we come to the Soe execs and WAPL execs. This really, I'm not going to go through every single one of them. This is just a reference, old name and the EQQ name. Most of them are still there. In fact, I think they're right. I think that's all of the old Soe execs. But if you look in the SOE manual, it will tell you that some of these have been deprecated and gives you an advice of a command that you can use instead. But basically, this is what happened to your Soe execs. There's nothing to stop you copying these members to the old names and putting them in a library. Equally, no Soe execs were updated as part of the upgrade to WAPL. So you use your Soe exec library in your new WAPL proc and run your Soe execs from there. There we go. Also, all of the PALM members got renamed. I had to say, remember I said everything had to begin with EQQ. So where you used to say something like file spec equals file all in your JCL, unfortunately, with WAPL as delivered, that would be file spec equals EQQ FL all. Now that's going to be quite an issue in that pretty much any of your WAPL jobs out there, sorry, of your SOE job out there would need JCL changes to point to the new members. So what we did was we created an SEQQ SAMP job called EQQ WPL CO, which will copy every EQQ member to its original name as well. So if you had SOE and you put WAPL in, make sure you run this job, because this will give you the ability to use all the old names still in your jobs. So this means kind of by now, your EQQ YXJCL proc from SOE, if you've changed it to point at the new WAPL data sets, maybe added the Soe exec library in there, and done the renames, then pretty much, in theory, I would say 99% of the time, your old SOE jobs will now run under WAPL. So that gives you a great way of getting into WAPL really quickly. But this is WAPL old style. I'll come on to how you get to WAPL new style in a few minutes. The other thing I would say is in your proc, make your things like file spec, ops, and ref refer to the new names. So where your EQQYXJCL proc probably still has things like file spec equals file none as the default. If you make it EQQFL none, then what will happen then over time is as you gradually go and change your jobs to the real names, the defaults won't be picking up any of the old names. So you can use SMF to find out where you've still got jobs using the old WAPL names, sorry, SOE names in there. Having got your new proc, by the way, don't just put it in to production. Pick a few jobs to try it out in using a JCL lib statement to try out your new SOE to WAPL converted proc. And once you're happy, back up your SOE proc, replace it with the WAPL one, because you can always use JCL lib for any SOE jobs that don't work to just back out quickly. But that hopefully will get you from using SOE to using WAPL very quickly without having to go and update lots of individual jobs. Then you can gradually go and convert the jobs one-to-one to the new WAPL by switching the proc to EQQYXJPX and correcting any names to the new prefixes. And I'll provide a little bit more of that coming up right now. So the new WAPL, it's slightly more elegant than the old version in that it doesn't have any IO at the start. It will read everything internally, and it gives the product the ability to be called from a load module, to be called from the started task, which means that you can now call WAPL over the REST API with a few limitations. And I'm sure if anybody's interested, we can do a presentation on WAPL over the REST API at another GSE conference. So let's have a look what we need to do. So first off, if your current old style WAPL or old style SOE job doesn't use file spec, opt file, ops, lang, or ref symbolic parameters, then it's already ready to go straight from EQQYXJCL to EQQYXJPX. Because basically you're not using any of the features that have changed between the two versions. So they're not in use, go straight to there. File spec. If you're using file spec, see if you can figure out what that file spec's doing. Look at the member, see what it's doing. If the member is loading every single record, so file all, then you'd replace that with a load def asterisk. If it's just looking at individual records so for example, everything in AD, then low def AD asterisk will do that. But basically, you need to convert your WAPL sysin to have either low def or output statements. Alternatively, if something looks a little bit too complicated to change over, you can put the EQQ file DD statement as an override in the JCL for that one job, just to point to the member until such a time as you figure that you can rewrite that using load def. So you still can use EQQ file, just don't use it through the file spec equals symbolic, and then you can go straight to the new prop. If you're using the ops equals or ops file equals symbolics, then these are options that are loaded every time everybody runs WAPL. So first off, have a good think. Do you really need to do this? Is this something that every single job needs to do? If not, then you take EQQ ops straight out of the JPX proc. You don't put it in there. But for jobs where you do feel you want to use EQQ ops, you can code the DD statement in the individual jobs. Equally, you might want to put the statements at the beginning of the sysin in the job. If it's a case of only a few jobs need this, but you set it for all of them, just put them in the sysin. So it's up to you. Do you put an EQQ ops DD statement in the JCL, or do you put the contents in the sysin? But only if you think you need every job to run this particular set of WAPL commands every time it runs, then you can still put EQQ ops in the JPX proc. We just don't put it in there now because we want you to try and be as efficient as possible. Oop, come back. Lang equals, you shouldn't have any of this in your JCL, but if you do, what it is WAPL was designed to be multilingual, but when it was released, it only was released in English. So as delivered, lang equals en is the only value you can put in there. But if you've got a specific reason and need an alternate language file, then you can code EQQ lang DD override in the JCL for the jobs that need it. But generally, you shouldn't be using this. Ref equals is another one. It points to the reference table that WAPL uses when it starts to load all of its definitions. So if you've got ref equals in your JCL, in a job JCL, then first, you shouldn't be using it. But if you are using it, there's a chance you've probably been told to do that by support because you've been given a temporary version of the EQQ ref file ahead of a fix. So my first thing was, if you've got EQQ ref, find out why it's there. If it's there for solving a particular problem, experiment to see if the problem's gone away, if it's been fixed with a permanent fix in the product now, which it probably has. In which case you can remove ref equals and ignore it. But if you find you still need it in there, then again, code an EQQ ref DD override in the job JCL just for this one job. But like I say, I'll be very surprised if anybody's got these two in the JCL. Oh, I might actually make it on time. Using WAPL before 9.3, though WAPL was released with 9.3, it will actually work with any version of TWS or IWS from 8.1 to 9.5. In fact, technically, it'll work back as far as 2.1, but you can't distinguish between those earlier releases. So if you haven't already, if you want to use WAPL with an earlier release, you must install 9.3 or 9.5 on an LPAR somewhere in your system. Run EQQ jobs, so you get the EQQYX JPX procedure created. And then you need to make the load module library, the MISC library, and the WAPL library available on each LPAR that you want to run WAPL on. And you also need to make sure that the either 9.3 or 9.5 load module library is authorized on each LPAR that you want to run WAPL on. You don't actually need to get 9.3 and 9.5 fully up and running. All you need is to do the install and the EQQ jobs bit, so you get the libraries and this procedure. So you don't have to do a full-blown install and test and all the exits. Just get that procedure, get those libraries, get that authorized. Once you've done that, amend your WAPL proc EQQYX JPX as follows. You need a step lib with the load module library from the version of IWS you wish to work with, followed by the WAPL version. So, example, if you wanted to run with 9.2, you'd have the 9.2 load library first, followed by the 9.5 load library afterwards. And you need to code the ver equals symbolic, either as a job level override or the default in your proc, for the version you wish to work with. So ver equals v920, for example, for 9.2. This tells WAPL when it starts that it is working with an earlier release, and it loads the data model for that release. So it will decode the records just as they would be for that particular release. And just so you know, the reason we've got the step lib of the two libraries, the original and the new one, is there's one module that WAPL needs, and this was the one to get over the problem with the running with initiators over the line. This module WAPL actually needs, it needs to be in an authorized library, but if you don't want to authorize your 9.5 library on every system, as long as you have that module somewhere in the step, either in the step lib or in your link lib, accessible and authorized, then WAPL will work fine. It doesn't care where it comes from as long as it is. It's just that one module that it needs, EQQ, SWA, RQ. So that is pretty much it. I'm sorry I went a little bit faster than I intended to, because we lost 15 minutes on the start. All the notes are still in there, obviously. You can go back and look at these. The presentation is already uploaded onto the site. Any questions?
Okay, so there were no questions into the chat other than Nigel going, yay, when at 9:15, when we finally opened the room. I have now given everyone in the room the power to unmute yourself. So if you would like to unmute yourself in order to ask Dean any questions, or just have a chat with Dean, that's quite acceptable. And just before that, again, the reminder, feedback, charity donation, charity donation, charity donation. That's it from me. Over to you and Dean. Okay, question from Nigel, or to everyone. A request. WAPL is wonderful, but can be a hard sell because of the learning curve. Is it possible to have many more examples in the manuals?
It is possible, and I would love to put loads more in there. It's just getting the time. What I would like to know is what kind of things do people want to see in the manual? Drop me a line. Let me know. If there's some examples of how to do this, how to do that. The problem was, if you remember back on one of the early slides, we talked about the blue wash. There was a lot of work went in trying to get WAPL in within the space of that release. And unfortunately, one of the things that fell short was examples. However, there are a lot of samples. If you go and look in EQQ SAMP, SEQQ SAMP, there are a lot of WAPL samples in there as well that show you how to do things like batch loader and some of the little tricks. But any particular area you feel I'd like to see samples of, let me know and I can get those done. Otherwise, it's a case of we gradually have to go through and put samples in for everything. But yeah, there are some, I agree, there should be more. But at 400 odd pages, the WAPL manual, it took a while to get that amount ready.
Hi Dean, so this is Nigel. I don't know if
Hi.
you remember, but we actually migrated from a competing product, as in Horizon's Batch AD
Yep.
and CP.
Yep.
Their manuals do have lots of examples
Yep.
on how to do things. Internally, we are actually getting pressure, bizarrely, to go back to those products simply because people don't understand WAPL. And I think that is because they can look at the Horizon manuals and go, oh, I want to do this, there's an example.
Yeah.
And it's not in the WAPL manual.
No.
Again, I need some time to actually come up with what we need as examples, but I'll try and do that.
Yeah, I mean, just pointers will make us target. One of the things we had intended doing very early on with WAPL was actually create a red book to go with it that would be more scenario based, because the WAPL manual is really a reference manual. So it just tells you the syntax of the commands. And we were going to produce a red book to show you how to do lots of things with WAPL. And then pretty much the red book program got severely cut. So we didn't get one in the end.
That's
but yes, I know red books. I used to love that, but you don't see hardly anywhere near as many red books now being produced. But yes, it's something we know we've got to revisit. But again, it's one of those things of only so many hours in the working day, which is why I say if you can tell me which things you would like to see examples of, we can target that. Because otherwise I could go and put examples in for things people go, well, I know how to do that. And I know how to do that. It'd be better if I could be targeted.
It is some sort of WAPL for dummies.
Yeah.
That's maybe available, you know, as with just a small starter set to it, but some sort of published area where people can put their own examples of things that they've done.
Yeah, we used to have the Z-Glue site, and that had a very good forum which had people that posted questions, and we gave solutions on there, and other people really enjoyed using that. They could go and say, oh yeah, that's how you do that, that's how you do that, and then it got deleted with no warning. So one day it wasn't there.
Maybe we can find some way to set something like that up. It's finding the forum first.
Yeah.
Because everybody always wants something slightly different. So
yeah.
So putting a lot of samples in, you can just miss the one that somebody wanted.
Yes.
But you know me and WAPL. If it can be broken, I break it.
Oh yes. Well, I mean, we even managed to break Zoom today with it.
Well, we did, yes. It is something of a speciality of mine to be able to break most things. I'm a great tester.
What was that? You can install it in about 10 minutes, 2 hours later.
Yeah. Yeah.
To be fair, that was the first time it had ever been installed where the data sets were non-SMS managed, but
Indeed, and that is generally the thing. It's environment, you know.
Yeah.
And security and all sorts of other things that people have on their systems that, you know, have not been thought of before. So,
yeah. Dean.
Yes.
I had a WAPL question. I was writing a WAPL program.
Yep.
And then I needed to check the return code from the previous WAPL statement.
Yes.
And before I read the manual, I was trying RC for return code.
Yes.
And that didn't work. And finally, I found in the manual how to do it. But
yep.
Is that something which could be added support for?
Well, just make RC of a WAPL variable. Yeah, I suppose we could.
Because that would look much more like.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't see why not.
Add it to your list, Steve.
Yeah. Add it to the very big list. The biggest I know it sounds a bit like an excuse, but the biggest problem is I'm no longer in the development team. So anything that needs to be done, I have to specify for somebody else to do now. Yeah. So, which is not too bad. It means I don't have to do all the legwork, but just have the ideas. But but yeah, it does make adding things a little more tricky now. It's part of the product.
Yeah, swings and roundabouts. What you gain one way, you lose in others. So, yeah. Anyone else?
Dean, is there a long-term view to getting WAPL to be able to access every single segment with insert, update, delete, add type functionality?
It should already be able to. Sorry, where do you mean?
Well, I've got a feeling that recently I was trying to look at the system automation segments, which you can do a modify on, but you can't go and check what the current value of them is.
Right. You should be able to, the way the model works is it should be able to do every single segment. This in the current plan, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, current plan or database, I suppose.
Well, I know I'm pretty sure they're there in the database because it's supported by a batch loader. So in database, it should be there. Yeah. Yes, there is a long-term view. It should already be there. So if you find you haven't got one, then get a case raised for that, because it'll be something that's been missed. And it's either a case of it's been missed from the PIF development, because WAPL's, or it was simply missed from the data model with WAPL itself. But yes, you should be able to get every segment that you can get at via the PIF, you should be able to get at via WAPL. That has always been the gain, the goal. That's goal and aim together. So yes, if you've got one that you can't, then get a case raised for that, because it should be possible.
Thank you.
I think actually now you mention the system automation, I think I have seen a case for that somebody else may have raised. So it might be with the latest maintenance, it might be somebody else has fixed it.
Fabulous. Also,
but
in the panels where we do a 9.6 RACF refresh,
yeah,
there's no way of doing that without going into the panels to do. Is there any plan to get anything into WAPL to allow us to do that via batch?
In that case, that is dependent on the TSO commands. So let me see if it's.
Yeah, I don't think there's a TSO command for it either.
Yeah, so in that case, that would have to be an RFE, at which point it would come into WAPL as well, because we put every TSO command, we put a pass through into WAPL. WAPL just executes the same TSO command under the covers. But yeah, WAPL is kind of restricted by what can be done via an existing interface. It's a sort of a collator of all the different mechanisms. But yeah, put in an RFE for that, because I don't imagine it would be too difficult.
I'm just wondering now if that is a TSO command or if it's a modified RACF command.
No, it is a workload scheduler command, or it would be a workload scheduler command.
Okay.
Because it's about reloading the definitions inside the controller. So what you would do when you're doing your rack F work, you might have to do a rack list refresh for that particular class. But then having done that, you still have to go into 9.6 and tell the controller to reload that stuff, because it loads it at startup in a lot of cases. So yes, it would be a ZWS command.